There are few things in life I enjoy more than a good bad movie. There's just something about them that brings me so much joy. Now, over the years, I've watched hundreds of bad movies, and I like to fancy myself a bit of an expert. To me, the key thing that all great bad movies share is sincerity. Every one of them were made by filmmakers who earnestly believed they were creating something great. A lot of times people confuse them with movies that were intentionally made to be bad, but I consider that stolen valor. For a bad movie to be great, the filmmaker really needs to believe they're making something special, which is what makes it so perversely entertaining when they completely whiff on it. Now, there are plenty of films that make the Bad Movie Hall of Fame. Plan 9 from Outer Space, Troll 2, any movie where Jean-Claude Van Damme plays an American. But there is one film I think is missing from that list. A movie that, despite being so bad, has such a clear message: that you're never too young to die.
John Stamos is Stargrove, the secret that killed his father and united an evil empire.
Where the red starts turning into the blue main.
Stargrove. Go! He's on the mission of his life.
Remarkable young man.
Stargrove!
Stargrove, the new American hero. Never too young to die. Rated PG-13.
Starts Friday.
The story of Never Too Young to Die begins with a man named Stephen Paul. Paul broke into the business as a child actor, but by the time he turned 21, he pivoted to working behind the camera. In 1980, he wrote and directed his first feature film, Falling in Love Again. Even though the movie featured Academy Award nominees Elliott Gould and Susanna York, it didn't do well commercially nor critically. Siskel and Ebert both gave the film a thumbs down, although Ebert was a little bit softer on it than Siskel. Any good feelings Roger felt towards Paul's directorial output was quickly crushed by Paul's next film, Slapstick of Another Kind. The film was an adaptation of a Kurt Vonnegut novel and starred comedy legends Madeline Kahn, Marty Feldman, and Jerry Lewis. Paul had starred in a previous Vonnegut film adaptation and used that connection to secure the rights. Not since he agreed to write a term paper for Thornton Melton had Vonnegut so regretted a deal. The movie was a huge bomb, and critics absolutely hated it. Ebert called the movie unfunny and offensive, while Siskel went as far to say, and I quote, "The best thing that could ever happen to this film is that it's never shown anywhere." Despite the failures, Paul was undeterred and chose to adapt his approach to filmmaking. He had produced both of his films himself and seemed to have the ability to charm investors into financing his projects. So he decided to double down on that skill by creating his own production company, Paul Entertainment, and began looking for his next great idea. That idea would come shaken, but not stirred, as he found his inspiration in the James Bond franchise. At that point in time, James Bond had been a pop culture staple for over 20 years. It was easy to see why. He was a white British man in a tuxedo who worked for the government. I can't think of anything cooler. Well, other than this. James Bond was especially popular with young men, and that's where Stephen Paul saw his opening. If younger people liked a grown-up James Bond, he bet they'd go nuts if they made him a kid.
James Bond Jr.
Yeah, believe it or not, Stephen Paul basically had the same idea as James Bond Jr., except a few years earlier. Paul's idea was for a live-action film franchise that would feature a character resembling, but still legally distinct enough from, James Bond. He saw an opportunity to get multiple movies out of the character, and began work on a film that he called The 00 Kid. Of course, at some point he realized he might be sued into oblivion, so the title was changed to Never Too Young to Die. The initial script was written by Stephen and his brother, and tells the tale of a young gymnast named Lance Stargrove. When his father, who resembles but is still legally distinct enough from James Bond, is killed, Lance must team up with the femme fatale Danja Dearing to stop a terrorist named Velvet Von Ragnar. Other people did a pass on the screenplay, including the credited co-writer Anton Fritz, but the most notable contributions came from Lorenzo Semple Jr. Semple was an accomplished screenwriter who was responsible for such films as Batman, 3 Days of the Condor, Flash Gordon, and 1983's entry to the James Bond franchise, Never Say Never Again. It was Semple who was responsible for one of the most memorable aspects of the film, which is the decision to make the Velvet Von Ragnar character intersex. And yes, that is a detail we will be circling back to later. Casting for the film began, and a relative unknown named John Stamos was chosen to play the lead role of Lance Stargrove. This was a couple years before Full House, and at that point, a 22-year-old Stamos was probably best known for his role on General Hospital as Blackie Parrish.
Everything always goes good for you guys. Everything. If it doesn't, your little daddies will take care of it. Well, it's different from me, all right? I gotta take care of myself. and I gotta get out of town, because that's taking care of myself, okay?
This was his attempt to pivot from television to film, and Stamos later told The Hollywood Reporter that he really thought the film was going to be his big break. For the role of his partner and love interest, Danja Dearing, the singer Vanity was brought on board. In the mid-80s, she was probably best known for her relationship, both personal and professional, with Prince, as well as her group Vanity 6. She had begun to transition into acting, and had recently played a lead role in the awesome cult classic movie, The Last Dragon, which, if you haven't seen, is the Citizen Kane of movies that stops the plot just to play DeBarge's Rhythm of the Night music video in its entirety. Every great hero needs a great villain, and who better to play a bad guy than the Kiss Demon himself, Gene Simmons. Like Vanity, Simmons was beginning to dip his toes into acting, having just played the lead villain opposite Tom Selleck in the sci-fi action film Runaway. Simmons would actually do double duty in Never Too Young to Die. Not only does he play the terrorist Velvet Von Ragnar, he also plays their secret alter ego Carruthers. In a 2015 interview with Delirium magazine, Simmons was incredibly candid about why he took the role, saying, quote, "I didn't read the script. All I knew was that I had 2 or 3 weeks off from a tour, and this guy, Stephen Paul, came up to me and he said, here's X amount of dollars. We want you to play 2 roles. A transvestite in high heels, we'll shave your chest, and all that stuff, and you can play another guy. I thought, oh cool. I didn't have a clue about how bad the film would be." And as the star of Kiss Meets Phantom of the Park, Simmons knows a thing or two about bad movies.
So that's it. Get them to whip up the crowd.
Incite a riot, destroy the park.
Blame it on us.
Right. We've got to get out of here.
Leave it to me, Star Child. I'll bend these beams with my mind.
Not yours.
Ours.
In a bit of a coup, they actually got George Lazenby in to play Lance's secret agent father, Drew. Lazenby was a former James Bond who had played 007 in 1969's On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Although the Drew Stargrove role is basically an extended cameo, and Lazenby had only played Bond once, his appearance still added some legitimacy to the Son of Bond concept. In an interview with the website Bondorama, Lazenby waxed poetically about his time on the film, telling them, "Yeah, I can barely remember that." Rounding up the cast in small roles included actors like John Anderson, Peter Kwong, and Robert Englund? Yeah, Freddy Krueger himself shows up in this movie. It's weird enough he's in here, but it's even weirder when you realize this movie was filmed between the second and third Nightmare on Elm Street movies. He was full-on Freddy Krueger at this point, and despite my best efforts, I can't find any explanation as to how he ended up in this. With the cast in place, the last step was to find a director. Instead of directing it himself, Stephen Paul chose to focus on writing and producing the film, and instead selected Lone Wolf McQuade director Stephen Carver to helm the project. For reasons unclear, Carver left the film, and Paul set forth in search of his replacement. In his attempts to market the film towards a youth audience, Paul wanted to find someone from the nascent world of music videos. There, he would find Gil Bettman. Bettman had begun his career in television on shows like The Fall Guy and Knight Rider, but he had transitioned to the world of music videos. His most famous work is probably on Sammy Hagar's I Can't Drive 55, but Bettman has told people that he thinks it is his best work on the Chicago Stay the Night video. The film was budgeted at $3 million and production began on June 1st, 1985. It didn't go great. While not an outright catastrophe, the production did have troubles at nearly every level. On the financial side, production had to be shut down 10 days into shooting due to a lack of funds. It took 6 weeks before enough money was raised to resume filming. When it came to the cast, Stamos and Simmons were professional, but Vanity proved to be a problem. She was at the height of her substance abuse issues at the time, and her behavior was incredibly erratic. Reports came out that she was constantly late and throwing temper tantrums, and years later John Stamos would tell The Hollywood Reporter that one of Vanity's hobbies during the production was to fire the prop machine guns between takes. On the creative side, conflicts arose from Bettman and Paul's different visions for the movie. According to Bettman's book, First Time Director, he saw the small budget and realized the only way the film would be successful would be to inject it with some self-awareness. The whole premise of the film was absurd, so why not steer into it and really dial up the camp? Paul, on the other hand, wanted the movie to be played totally straight. He was so protective of his vision that he famously told Bettman that, quote, "Any changes in this script are going to come from my pen." Despite all the turmoil, production soldiered on and finally wrapped on October 25th, 1985. In an incredibly weird piece of trivia, in an episode of the Projection Booth podcast, Bettman actually credited Back to the Future director Robert Zemeckis for helping him edit the movie. Zemeckis was a mentor of his, and it was him who had the idea for the film's opening scene, which theatergoers finally got to experience on June 13th, 1986. I can only imagine what must have been racing through the mind of those theatergoers seeing it for the first time in 1986, because Never Too Young to Die is an absolutely insane spectacle of a movie. To paraphrase a great Vincent Price anecdote I heard on a podcast once, "This film is such a marvelous piece of rubbish." Man, I'm doing a lot of voices in this one. There's a lot to unpack in this movie, but let's start with the old back of the VHS box style summary. In the film, the evil terrorist Velvet Von Ragnar seeks to poison the city's water supply using a small computer disk. Unfortunately for them, their plan is foiled by their nemesis, secret agent Drew Stargrove, who steals the disk and hides it away with his unwitting teenage son Lance. After Velvet murders Drew, Lance discovers his father's real identity and becomes embroiled in his world of espionage. He meets his father's partner Danja Dearing and teams up with her to try and stop Ragnar's evil plan. As the film proceeds, Lance goes from boy to man and sets forth to do the Stargrove name proud and bring his father's killer to justice. Considering the budget, Bettman does a good job as director.
Rail and kill.
All the action scenes are great, particularly an extended car chase sequence that I think is actually kinda cool. As far as the acting, well, that one's more of a mixed bag. This was John Stamos' first big role, and it shows. He isn't bad in the movie, but he isn't great either. But to be fair to Stamos, I don't know if there was a way to play Lance Stargrove that wasn't kind of irritating. Vanity does a decent job as Danja Dearing, but she wasn't exactly putting in an Academy Award-winning performance either. So much of the movie is centered around their chemistry, but I'm not buying it. If I'm being honest, I just find myself a little bored when it's just the two of them on screen. Except for this part. I love this part. The scene I've been playing this whole time is by far the best part of the movie. Hold on a second, we're almost at my favorite part. There it is. Even though Stamos and Vanity are billed as the film stars, the real star is Gene Simmons. He is an absolute delight in this, and steals every scene he's in. Up against the slightly wooden Stamos and Vanity, Simmons comes across like he's in a completely different movie. Well, that was actually intentional. Earlier, I discussed the pushback Gil Bettman received from Stephen Paul in regards to making the film less serious. He didn't win the war, but the Velvet Von Ragnar character was where he won the battles. Paul wanted the rest of the movie to be played straight, but conceded that Velvet could be campier. Bettman intentionally hid that camp factor from Stamos and Vanity, but Simmons was a more than willing participant. He didn't just chew the scenery, he devoured it. Bettman loved working with Gene Simmons, and loved the Ragnar character, telling the Pantograph Press, "He's like Dr. No in drag with a stage show." That's not a joke, there's an actual stage show during the movie. Putting aside the logic of why Wanted Terrorist would also be moonlighting as a nightclub act, it's a tremendous scene. It is Gene Simmons firing on all cylinders. For devoted Kiss fans, that outfit may look familiar, as it's the same outfit that actress Linda Carter wore for a 1970s TV special that saw her perform Kiss's I Was Made for Lovin' You.
I was made for loving you, baby. You were made for loving me.
Contrary to popular belief, that wasn't some elaborate joke by Simmons. He had no idea it was the same outfit until years later. In another piece of trivia, Simmons took the inspiration for Ragnar from transgender glam icon Jane County. I can't fully confirm this, but I saw it said in several places that Simmons' song in the nightclub was based on County's "It Takes a Man Like Me to Find a Woman Like Me." Now, it's hard to talk about the Velvet Von Ragnar character without addressing the fact that a big part of their characterization is that they are intersex. Only they don't use the word intersex in the movie, they use a different word that at this point I think is considered derogatory. It's a fair question to ask if the character is offensive, and as a cisgender heterosexual male, I feel equipped to answer simply with a, "I don't know, it's not up to me." You could tell me it was, and I would not be surprised. But during my research, I didn't see too much discourse that swung one way or another. Although there were exceptions. I think the most interesting analysis I did find about the character came from Sean Abley and Tyler Dupe's Queer Horror, where they wrote, quote, "Velvet's gender non-conforming presentation is in many ways an anomaly for a film of this era, and the portrayal of their expressions of lust and desire even more so. Appearing in high drag in one scene and butch military garb the next, Velvet seems to relish exploring their identity and making no qualms about who they are. While still cast as a villain in a movie that seems to want you to gawk a little, the character's agency is still notable for the time period." There is honestly so much more to the movie than what I've talked about, but you don't have all day, so instead, I'm just going to show you some of my favorite parts completely out of context.
Fork over some ram cake, bitch, or we'll tenderize your butt.
What?
And Ragnar!
My God, it is Ragnar!
It could be wonderful. It could be happening if you could only. It could be. I win!
Stephen Paul had high hopes for the film, even leaving room at the end for a sequel, but in case you haven't figured it out now, the movie absolutely tanked. I can't say these numbers are fully accurate, but one website had the box office total gross at under $130,000. The critics weren't kind to it either, with the Waco Tribune calling it, quote, a textbook example of what's wrong with movies today. Simmons and Stamos both hated the film, with Stamos thinking that he had basically ended his career before it had really started. The film was released on home video in 1987, but was quickly forgotten. All the parties involved continued on with their careers and tried their best to forget the whole thing. Well, all except Stephen Paul, who continued to make low-budget action movies and in 1993 got to see his vision of a teenage James Bond finally come to light as he wrote and produced Corey Haim in the spy comedy, The 00 Kid. Finally, in 1999 he got the franchise he had long craved, as his film Baby Geniuses was a modest success and spawned multiple sequels. Believe it or not, Paul has done very well for himself as a producer, and is a legitimate player in Hollywood. He's helped produce films like Ghost Rider, Doomsday, and Karate Dog. In 2024, he was one of the bidders to buy Paramount, and although that bid failed, he can rest easy in the knowledge that his friend Jon Voight made him a special advisor in his campaign to make Hollywood great again. Gil Bettman didn't see the success he hoped for after Never Too Young to Die. He did a few more projects, but he grew disillusioned with Hollywood and left it behind. Other than a few projects for Sammy Hagar, Bettman has chosen to focus his efforts on academia and became a film professor at California's Chapman University. If you are one of his students watching this, I beg of you, please ask him how Robert Englund ended up in this movie. Vanity also left the business, but for far different reasons. By the 90s, her substance abuse problem was out of control. After an overdose, she devoted herself to God and was finally able to get sober. She spent the rest of her life as a minister before sadly passing away from kidney failure in 2016. Gene Simmons is, well, still Gene Simmons. As for its star, it took him a long time, but John Stamos has finally come around on the film. Lucky for him, his career didn't end with Never Too Young to Die, as 2 years later he got the role on Full House that launched him into the mainstream. It's only in recent years that Stamos has been able to watch and enjoy just how absurd the movie is. In fact, it seems like at this point, he's just baffled that it isn't a bigger hit on the bad movie circuit. As he told The Hollywood Reporter, it's the perfect midnight movie, where people can come and dress up. It's, what's the term I'm looking for? The best worst thing you'll ever see. And while it hasn't hit a level of Rocky Horror fandom just yet, its popularity is slowly growing. Word has spread as it slowly becomes one of those movies that needs to be seen to be believed.
Railing kill.
Just searching for it online will bring up hundreds of podcasts and YouTube channels covering the film, including the Red Letter Media crew covered it in the very first episode of Best of the Worst. Fan demand grew enough that in 2017, Shout Factory released the movie on Blu-ray, complete with a commentary track from pop culture historian Russell Dyball, which was a huge help for me while doing research for this video. There is a fandom out there, but the film hasn't fully crossed over to the mainstream. But I think at this point, it's only a matter of time. And when it does, I'll be there, frantically eating an apple. Screw it, here's some more clips out of context.
What are you doing?
The finger, 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 the finger.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, well, hit the like button. And if you're interested in seeing more of my stuff, hit subscribe. And in the comments, let me know what you think belongs in the Bad Movie Hall of Fame. I'll be here, watching this scene for the 500th time.